Welcome, everyone. We're excited to be here for this Climbing Mount Debt Borrow Better webinar. The VIN Foundation in collaboration with SAVMA and VBMA. My name is Jordan Ben-Shia. I'm the VIN Foundation Executive Director, and I'll be here helping with housekeeping this evening. A few things to note: we want to use the chat window for all tech questions or any issues, and we want to go ahead and use the Q&A window for any questions. We have a great resource here in Dr. Rebecca Mears, and we have a bench of deep help with the student debt education team. So all of your questions, if you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A window. And then if you see somebody ask a question that you think, I definitely want to know the answer to that, go ahead and give it an upvote, because that'll help bump the questions to the top for us. And that way we can remember to keep a lookout and make sure we absolutely answer those questions. Dr. Rebecca Mears has a great presentation planned for this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Mitch for him to welcome the VBMA colleagues.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm Mitch London. I'm a representative of the national VBMA team. Thank you so much for being here tonight. If you're from SAVMA, welcome, and I encourage you to reach out to your VBMA board at your school. VBMA is an awesome organization for networking, career development, all that stuff. And if you're from the VBMA side of things, welcome as well. We love seeing you here again, and I encourage you to reach out to your SAVMA counterpart at your chapter, where we both serve different roles, but they're very collaborative, and I think you get the most out of your vet school experience if you participate in both. So definitely talk to your counterpart if you're not involved in both organizations already. From a more logistical VBMA side of things, I think Victoria said in the chat, please remember to click attend on my VBMA so that you can earn BCP credit. And then additionally, I'll be sending out a link to a quiz. I know quizzes stink. It's not that kind of quiz. It's just participation based to make sure that you were actually here, and so you get your credit. I'll send that out with about 10 minutes to go in the talk, and then it'll be open until 30 minutes after this meeting closes. So roughly, I guess that would be 8:30 Eastern time, give or take. And then yeah, please just go ahead and complete that as soon as possible. It won't take any time at all. And then for the chapter officers in the audience, that form will get emailed out to you tonight so that you can approve or reject credit as needed. And then you can go ahead and close that meeting and put this one to bed. But again, thank you so much to VIN Foundation and Dr. Mears and Dr. Bartles and Jordan and Paul for setting this all up. We hope you have a good time tonight. And that is actually going to be 9:30 Eastern time, not 8:30. Got my time zones mixed up. So, hey, it is what it is. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Mitch. Just a reminder for everyone, if you're just coming in here, please go ahead and use that Q&A window for all of your questions. We have a great resource here with Dr. Rebecca Mears, and then a deep bench with our student debt education team with Dr. Bartels and Dr. Pion as well. So go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A window. If you see one that you want to make sure gets answered, or you think that's one I want to make sure I'm curious about as well, go ahead and give it an upvote. That'll help bump it to the top of the list, and we make sure that it gets answered this evening. Also, if you have any technical issues, please put that in the chat, but we just want to only put questions in the Q&A window. It'll help us make sure that we're keeping track of those and getting those answered. We will also be sending out a follow-up email to everybody that's registered, who will get a recording of this webinar. We know that's a very popular question, and that will come out early next week, and that'll be coming from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rebecca Mears.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Mitch. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that Tony and Lucy got to make an appearance as well. Tony will be joining us a little bit later on to help answer some questions and things like that. And I'm really excited for you all to be here. Thank you so much for taking the time and your evening later on in the daytime to hang out with us for a little while and learn about student debt. I know it's not everybody's most favorite topic to talk about. Surprisingly, it has become one of my favorite topics to talk about. But I'm really just excited to be here and to join you. We've got over 200 people that have joined already. And I really wanted to take a moment to shout out to those of you that have joined, that have registered, that are watching this afterwards, because taking your head out of the sand and learning about student debt and what you can do about your student loans now while you're in school is really just a vital part of your borrowing and repayment strategy. So definitely kudos to you all for that. We're going to start off with, a little bit about me. We like to treat student debt as we do medical cases. And so I start off with my student loan history and signalment, right? So I'm a single income, one spoiled dog household. He is currently passed out behind me in his dog bed. This is Remington, you'll see there. And of course, I had to include him in his VBMA bandana from when I was a student as well. I graduated from University of Georgia in 2020. When I graduated, I ended up with undergrad and vet school debt. And so for me, it was really important when I started to look where I was going to go to vet school that I be able to keep my borrowing lower, because I knew that I was already coming in with student debt from undergrad. So I went to University of Georgia because I was a Delaware resident at the time, and that allowed me to get a contract seat there. When I left school, I started off my career as an equine veterinarian. So you'll see that wonderful Belgian mare down there in the corner. She was unfortunately dystocia, needed a couple of days of uterine lavages, and she was a wee bit taller than I am. My assistant at the time found it quite hysterical that I needed my stool and my wetsuit for that. I enjoy traveling, so that's me on a trip to Alaska a couple of years ago. I was able to visit Mount Denali, absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite trips that I've ever taken. There's that spoiled dog, of course. That upper picture in the left-hand corner is him in front of the house that I bought for him, because yes, I am that millennial that bought my dog a house. I did not need a house, but he did. So he has a house and a yard now. And he's, like I said, incredibly spoiled. And then this guy over here, that's my dad. And I talk about my dad when I talk about this stuff because he's really important to me. And not just that he's been a, great figure in my life and everything like that, but also because unfortunately my dad does have dementia. He has a form of dementia called primary progressive aphasia. So he no longer is able to communicate with us. And that's something that my family is going through. And the reason I bring that up is he lives with my sister. She's his primary caregiver, but all of my sisters and I share decision making for him. So we have, the responsibility of what does dad need? How do we make sure that he gets that? How do we provide that? And I know that student debt's already a bit of a downer topic, and now I'm talking about, my dad having this unfortunate dementia diagnosis as well. But the reason I bring this up is because these pictures here, like, this is my stuff, right? And I think we all have stuff, whether it is a parent with health issues, whether it is the type of career you want to have, you want to travel, maybe you want to buy a house, maybe you want to start a family one day, right? We all have those things that we want. Most of us also have something like this too. This is my amount of student debt. So I have about $250,000 worth of student debt that has not stopped me from buying a house and having a career that I really enjoy. But I do think it is incredibly important for myself and all of us to understand, how do we handle that student debt amount, as well as being able to do the things that we want to do in life. I think that's just, something for all of us. And so that's why I really enjoy doing this and helping colleagues to better understand their student debt, their repayment, things like that. I started off when I graduated, I did consolidate my loans. I signed up for revised pay as you earn. That was the most beneficial plan for me at the time. And then when I graduated into the pandemic. So that was a really weird time. But that also means that I've been able to benefit from the extended pandemic forbearance, which, has turned off student loan payments and interest for the last about 3.5 years. And that's just started back. Many of you I know are, we've got a couple of people that are going to graduate in 2024, 2025. You've been able to benefit from that 0% interest while you're in school as well. I'm now going to start using save for my student loan repayment, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You may have heard about that in the news and things. That is the new income-driven repayment plan that's available. It's an updated version of Repay, and I'm planning for forgiveness. That is my method for student loan repayment. That's how I am able to focus on my student loans, as well as all of these other things that I want to be able to do in my life. And a large part of that has come from the VIN Foundation resources, what I have learned when I started as a student, all the way through now, where I'm doing this, as a job, oddly enough. Never thought I'd be there in veterinary medicine. So I have been lucky enough to join the VIN Foundation student debt education team. Our focus is really on helping colleagues to understand student debt and repayment options, right? We even start with pre-vet students all the way through retirement. There's so many free resources for you from VIN Foundation. As you all know, as vet students, hopefully you have a free student membership to VIN, where you can access all of these things. But the VIN Foundation is actually separate from VIN. It's in the nonprofit arm. And so all of the VIN Foundation resources are free. And that goes anywhere from our student debt to our vets to vets resource, vets for vets resources, and many more. So definitely check those out. The student debt resources from VIN Foundation it feels endless at times. So we do anything from webinars like this. We have blog posts that update you on the most recent information that you need to know about student debt. We'll do podcasts to break down that information. We have WikiDebt, which is like our resource library, so you can start diving into some of these topics more and more, as well as our student debt message boards. And that really is a gold mine of knowledge on those student debt message boards. We've been able to help thousands of colleagues better understand student debt, answer questions, go through repayment scenarios. So I definitely encourage you to get on there and explore those message boards. You'll always have access to those message boards through the VIN Foundation. So obviously you can get on the VIN message boards and find that student debt folder and start exploring that now. But even regardless of if you decide to continue your VIN membership once you're out of school, you're still able to access that. And the unique thing about the student debt message boards is the fact that it is veterinary specific advice, right? That's what we do. We help our colleagues. And so, we're really focused on how does student debt and repayment impact you as a veterinarian, right? You guys probably know veterinarians, we don't necessarily make the amount of money that people think we do, but we often graduate with really high amount of student debt. So how does that work? And that's largely what we do with the student debt education team. So check out those resources. We're going to highlight a bunch of them tonight as well. So starting off with just some general information, right? Here's some, this is from the 2023 AVMA report on the economic state of the veterinary profession. This is looking at average student debt for recent graduates. So this is from the class of 2022. You're all vet students, you're smart people. We understand the definition of averages, right? This number isn't necessarily reflective of what you may have of student debt, right? Maybe you have higher amounts of student debt. Maybe you have lower amounts of student debt than we see there. We've seen that more so depending on where you go to school than, necessarily just being a vet school student in general. You'll notice that there's the two numbers here. So this lower number reflects all graduates, and then this higher number here reflects those with debt. Usually it's about, it varies, but there's usually about 15 to 20% of veterinary school graduates each year that graduate without student debt. So then if we just focus on those that do, you see this number here. You'll notice that sort of trending downward a little bit here that last year, which seems like decreasing amounts of student debt should be really exciting. I say seems because I'm not necessarily as excited as I think maybe I should be about that. Does anybody, you can throw it in the chat, does anybody have any ideas as to why I may not be really excited about seeing that number come down? I know. Mitch told you there was going to be a quiz afterwards and you didn't realize there was going to be one in there during. So I see interest rates are increasing. Okay. Any other thoughts? Not a bad thought. Interest rates will go up. Yeah, lots of concern about interest rates going up. We're going to talk about that some more. Yeah, some great thoughts there. Yeah, so somebody mentioned that it went down due to COVID. And so that's definitely one of those considerations as well. So for the last 3.5 years, we saw interest rates were set to zero temporarily, right? And that resulted in those graduates having less student debt at graduation because their student loans weren't accumulating interest throughout the time that they were in school, right? So when you see that kind of information shared around, I definitely encourage you to use those critical thinking skills and, kind of look at it and say, why did that happen? And do I expect that to continue? And we're going to talk more about that interest rate thing as well. So looking at distribution, again, like I said, usually you see somewhere between 15 and 20% will graduate without student debt, and then various amounts when you go through here. This over 200,000, it looks like it's really been increasing over the last couple of years. There does seem to be a little bit of trend there. So we see 1 in 3 graduates graduated with over $200,000 worth of student debt. And then if we look at the over 300,000, you see 9.2 there. So, just these trends of student debt, and, some of us are working with really high numbers. When we look at, data on underrepresented groups in veterinary medicine, we see further disparity there. So just things to be aware of. And it's not just that we're dealing with large numbers, right? We also know that within veterinary medicine, there's a lot of concern about well-being and mental health issues. And this is from the Merck Animal Health Veterinary Wellbeing study a couple of years ago. And we see that one of the predictors of low well-being is having higher student debt, right? So how do we start thinking about our student debt, what we can do now while we're in vet school, and then how do we set ourselves up for the best, repayment success that we can have? So this is where we're headed, right? We're going to talk about some student loan basics, kind of get us all on the same page so that we're, talking the same language. And then we're going to go into what we call borrow better. So really focusing on what you can do now while you're in school. And then we'll wrap up with some repay wiser tips and some things that I think are important for you to know moving forward. So these are some of the questions you've set, right? What's better, private or government loans? What does it mean to consolidate? How does the end of the loan interest pause affect our loans and how much we need to pay back, right? These are some great questions, and we're going to revisit these because these are the things that we're going to talk about throughout this evening. I really think that, if I had to say probably my top things that I wanted you to know and kind of take away from this, we're going to really focus on understanding borrowing and repayment, how to avoid common mistakes, and set yourself up for repayment success. I think my favorite question was probably this one in the lower corner here about what is one mistake or something you wish you had known sooner regarding your student loans and payment. I could do a whole talk on that question alone right there. I have definitely made mistakes with my student loans, and I want you all to learn from the mistakes that I have made. Before I really started diving into this and understanding my repayment options and whatnot, I was like just hoping for the best. It almost felt like a Hail Mary sometimes. And that really was not the best way to approach my student loans. So don't make the mistakes that I made. And I'm really glad that, again, you're here tonight so that we can start learning about these things. All right, so some of the concepts that we're going to talk about: student loan repayment, what is student loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment, and then we're going to start on that student loan physical exam. All right, so again, relating this back to kind of how we look at medical cases. And I say that not just because it's cute, right? We have a nice Schitt's Creek gift there, but also much like when you're a veterinarian and as you're learning to do now, when you have a client and you're discussing treatment for their pet, you're encouraging them to, yes, it is an emotional decision, but you're also encouraging them to understand the data, the information, the diagnostics that you've used, and how they can make the best decision for their animal. I kind of want you to do the same thing here, right? It's very easy to look at our student debt, say this is a huge number, I can't wait to get out from underneath of it, and how do I do that as soon as possible? But I really encourage you to kind of pump the brakes on the emotional reaction there and look at the numbers for what they are, right? These are numbers. This is a financial decision, and really kind of step back and see what makes the most sense for you, your family, your career, your life moving forward. So there's two primary student loan repayment methods. We have time-driven and then we have income-driven. Time-driven is what we tend to think of more when we think of debt repayment, right? So this we'll see for private or federal student loans. There's a couple of different plans available that will extend over different periods of time. When you look at time-driven repayment, the standard 10-year plan is the default plan that your student loans go into when you graduate if you don't select something else. But when we look at the amount of student debt that we often have as vet school graduates, and when we look at the standard 10-year payment for that, I mean, we're looking at sometimes $2,000, maybe $3,000 a month. And for many of us, that's just not a number that we can pay at that time, right? That's a significant chunk of our take-home pay. And maybe that's not going to give you the financial flexibility that you need at that time in your life to repay your student loans and do something, work on other areas of your financial wellness. What if you want to do an internship or a residency and you're definitely not making enough to afford that payment, right? How do you use some of these other repayment plan options to be able to do those things, to be able to afford life and handle your student loans? So that's where these income-driven repayment plans come in. That is unique to federal student loans. And I feel like they're easily misunderstood because they are a much different way of repaying debt. And so we're going to focus a lot on these tonight. What do they mean? How does it work? And really just sort of help you to build a better understanding of those things. These are based on your income, your family size, and the plan you choose, right? And so the idea being that as your income increases, your monthly student loan payment goes up, but it's always based on your discretionary income. And so that way you're able to, have a little bit more of that financial flexibility throughout repayment. Anytime you see this like orange little thing here, that's a link. You guys can click on those. Like we said, this Prezi is available and we'll send it out as well so that you're able to click on these links, review the slides and everything like that. So there's a couple of different calculators listed there. I do have to say I'm partial to the VIN Foundation tool, not only because this is like those are what I use and everything else, but they have been designed to help you better understand your student loans and your repayment and have a lot more flexibility in the opt-ins and settings and things like that. So they're really, really helpful. So thank you to those of you that did the homework. And that really helped me to develop a better idea of like where you stand with things and the questions that you have. I will say that this was interesting. So Tony and I were actually talking about this information the other day, and Dr. Tony Bartels and Dr. Paul Payan have been doing this for over 10 years now and have just amassed so much knowledge that I'm really grateful to benefit from. But one of the things that we saw is that the amount of you that indicated that you wanted to repay your loans as soon or as fast as possible was quite a bit higher than we typically see. We've over the years of doing this, you kind of tend to see some trends and things like that. And that was definitely a number that had seemed to jump up. And before you start, thinking about getting to graduation and starting your job as a veterinarian and whatnot, pump the brakes maybe before we think about throwing all of our money at our student loans, and maybe let's explore what it would look like if we were to use some other options. And that would allow us to, again, just focus on repaying your student loans and working on other areas of your overall financial wellness. So when we talk student loan forgiveness, it's an unusual concept because we don't see that with other types of debt. So the idea here is to pay the minimum based on your income and your family size, which again, as your income goes up, payment goes up throughout repayment, and plan for forgiveness. The years of doing this have shown some trends, and so you'll see here those with a student debt to income ratio at graduation or soon after that have a debt to income ratio of less than 1, you're likely to repay your student loan balance to 0 before reaching forgiveness, right? And so that might mean that you use a time-driven plan, or maybe you can still use an income-driven plan to benefit during that time. Those that have higher student debt to income ratios, so when we start looking at a 2-to-1 ratio, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 even, I've definitely seen those. Those individuals are projected to reach student loan forgiveness and can really benefit from that. The people that end up in this like gray zone, kind of in between 1 and 2, you may or may not reach student loan forgiveness, but really no matter which of these categories you fall into, there's likely some benefit from using an income-driven repayment plan, especially that new SAVE plan that we'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. The idea with student loan forgiveness is paying for the maximum repayment period based on your income. When you reach the end of that time, which is 20 or 25 years, depending on the plan that you use, then the remaining amount is forgiven. However, that forgiveness is treated as income, and so it may potentially be taxable at that time. So you might have heard of the tax bomb, right? That's pretty common terminology when we talk about these things. I do challenge you, is it a tax bomb or is it a discount on forgiveness? And we'll explore that a little bit more using some of the student debt center tools. You know, tax bomb, I feel like makes it seem like it is a surprise and it comes out of nowhere. We know that that's how these income-driven repayment plans are listed or, you know, set out in your master promissory note, how they're, you know, put out in the laws and things like that. And so plan for that, right? Make that a part of your financial wellness. Make it a part of your budget when you get, you know, out of school and you have that money to be able to do those things. You know, for those, I think I saw a question somewhere in the chat about those that are planning on as soon as possible and things like that. If you have that lower debt to income ratio, there, you know, you have some different options for your student loan repayment. That's not the majority of us, right? We saw that in one of those earlier graphs when we looked at the distribution of student loans. So we're really going to focus more so on the majority tonight, those of us that have higher amounts of student debt and might benefit from some of these things. So let's talk more about those income-driven repayment plans. We have a couple of them listed here, but there's been some changes over the last couple of years. So income contingent repayment and pay as you earn are set to phase out next summer. Those will phase out as of July 1, 2024. For those of you, especially if they're, you know, those of you from 2024, 2025, you might be familiar with pay as you earn, pay. That's largely been one of the most beneficial income-driven repayment plans for those that are eligible. So that going away serves as a little bit of a shakeup as these things are happening. That's okay. There's still, you know, some really good options here, and so we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. But the thing with pay going away is the fact that it'll phase out as of July 1st, 2024. For those of you that are 2024 grads, that is likely to be a really tight timeline for when you graduate, when your student loans enter the grace period, and then when you're able to get into a repayment plan if you consolidate and in that grace period early. So for anybody on this call, it's unlikely that you'll be able to use pay. For most people on this call, it's going to make sense to start off using SAVE, the Saving on a Valuable Education, which is the new repayment plan. When we look at the repayment plans that are available here, your student loans are eligible for either IBR 2009 or IBR 2014, and that depends on when you started borrowing. And then there's SAVE here as well. These list the maximum time repayment plans, so the maximum repayment period here. So you'll notice that IBR 2009 and SAVE are both 25-year maximum repayment plans. That having SAVE now basically makes IBR 2009 obsolete. It's not necessarily going to be the most beneficial plan for anybody. So really, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at IBR 2014 and SAVE. These percentages here are the percentage of your discretionary income that your monthly payment would be. That's a little confusing. So let's look at that a little more, right? Let's use some actual numbers to look at this. So let's say you have a $120,000 income, and we're going to make some calculations here. So SAVE protects more income from student loan repayment than IBR 2014 does. SAVE protects 225% of the HHS poverty guidelines, right? So this is the poverty guideline amount for a family size of 1. And so you then take your income, subtract that amount, and that gives us our discretionary income. So you'll see the discretionary income using SAVE is lower than what we see for IBR. Then we're going to calculate out the monthly payment. So SAVE is based on 10% of that discretionary income. And when you look at IBR 2009, based on 15%. And so we then divide that out. You can see that based on an income of $120,000 per year, you're then looking at a monthly student loan payment from anywhere of $727 per month up to $1,227 per month, right? So we can see how, based on the amount of income that's protected, based on the plan that you choose and how much your payment is, how that might affect what your monthly student loan payment looks like once you get to that point. You'll notice that SAVE has a 5 to 10% of your discretionary income as your monthly payment. That's because for those with only undergrad loans, that'll be 5% of their discretionary income. For those of us with grad school loans, like vet school loans, that's 10%. If you have a mixture of both, like myself, then what your payment will be is a weighted average of your interest of your undergrad and grad school loans. For most of us, because our grad school borrowing is so much more significant than our undergrad borrowing, it'll still be pretty close to this 10%, but it may come a little bit lower than that. This here is calculating out the SAVE and IBR 2014 payments for different adjusted gross incomes per year. For some reason, there seems to be a magic number that everybody thinks they want to pay when they graduate vet school. Like, this is, I want to put X amount of dollars towards my student loans each month as soon as I graduate. Normally, we see that number somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500, and it usually kind of comes out to $1,200. You guys, when you submitted the homework, you went even higher. The average that I calculated for what everyone had submitted that did the homework about what they wanted to pay was $1,700 a month. When we look at, take a look at SAVE here, when you get closer to that $1,700 a month, that means that that's requiring a annual income, and this is your adjusted gross income, of anywhere from about $230,000 to $250,000. We're not seeing new grads come out and necessarily making this amount of money. So don't be tempted to pay more than your income requires until you're actually making that amount of money, right? The highest number that I saw was $5,000 a month. Somebody wanted to put $5,000 a month towards their student loans. And it wasn't just one person. There were multiple people that wanted to do that. And I mean, $5,000 a month using SAVE is like off my chart here, right? So if you calculate that out, that means that you're earning, your AGI is about $630,000 a year. If you find a job making $630,000 a year as a new grad veterinarian, let me know, because I think I might be in the market for a job change. Right? Like, it's not necessarily a number that we're, we're seeing just, it's so easy to say like, yes, I want to put $5,000 a month towards my student loans. But what does that actually look like when you look at your take home pay, when you look at what you're actually going to be earning and your expenses? Unpaid interest. This is a topic that I feel like makes everybody do this. Somewhere Jordan is laughing right now because she just found out that I really do love Britney Spears. So I'm sure there's probably some cackling going on in her screen. That's a confusing topic. So let's break that down a little bit more. So your student loans have an interest rate attached to them, and you're accruing interest on the principal balance that you've borrowed throughout both school and in repayment. So these images are taken from the loan repayment simulator, and you'll see this orange bar here is the principal. So notice that that does not change throughout repayment, right? Because our student loans, again, are different from other types of debt. It's not compounding, and so you're not earning interest on interest. Instead, the yellow bar here is your unpaid interest, and that stays in its own separate unpaid interest bucket. What you'll notice using IBR 2014 is that while your payment is less than the interest accrued each month, that amount of unpaid interest is added to your unpaid interest, your total balance over time. This principal here, I think I saw a question real quick in the chat. This principal here, that's the amount that you borrow. All right, so this is the amount of student loans that you have, and then interest is earned on top of that. And so we see, again, that over time in repayment, using some of the income-driven repayment plans, that total balance will grow. And that's been largely one of the most frustrating aspects of income-driven repayment over the years. It's very frustrating to see that you're making your payment, but then see your total balance grow. With SAVE, there is what we call a 100% unpaid interest subsidy. So that means once your minimum monthly payment is made each month, any remaining unpaid interest is subsidized. It is not added to your total balance. So when we look at this graph down here, that's SAVE, and you'll notice that yellow bar doesn't change over time, right? Until your payment begins to surpass the unpaid interest or the interest accrued each month, then you start to see that go down, but you don't see that growth effect over time. Now, you guys are students, and I've said you have interest accruing on your student loans, much like we're kind of seeing here in these repayment graphs, but you're having that happen while you're in school. And so we always get questions from students, well, how do I benefit from this unpaid interest subsidy now? How can I get my student loans in SAVE now so that I'm not accruing interest? And the unfortunate answer is you can't get into a repayment plan until you've graduated, right? So while your student loans are in school, you are unable to benefit from this. However, you can benefit from it once you enter repayment. But while we're in school, we can focus on what we can do now to, borrow appropriately and make sure that we're, setting ourselves up for repayment success in the future. We haven't talked about public service loan forgiveness. I did see some questions about this that you all had submitted. So let's take a second. Public service loan forgiveness is not a repayment plan in and of itself. You are required to use a forgiveness eligible plan. I'm going to recommend using SAVE during that time because it's going to result in the lowest monthly payment. And you make those payments while you're working in a public service job. I see that gets confused all the time in the message boards when we're helping veterinarians. They'll tell me like, oh, I don't think I'm eligible for forgiveness because I don't work in a public service job. These are two separate programs, right? So student loan forgiveness through income-driven repayment versus student loan forgiveness through PSLF, public service loan forgiveness. Working in an eligible job, that could be any number of things in veterinary medicine, right? Maybe you're a shelter vet, maybe you work in the military, maybe you work in academia, things like that. A lot of times Internships and residencies may be eligible for this as well. So if you're interested in pursuing advanced training, this is something to know about and look into. It requires 120 monthly payments using a forgiveness eligible plan while you're working in that eligible employment. Those 120 payments don't have to be consecutive. So say you start off in a public service job, leave it for whatever reason, and then come back to it, you would continue to earn that time towards PSLF. PSLF time does also count towards income-driven repayment forgiveness as well. And that's something else that gets a little confused sometimes. PSLF is a tax-free forgiveness. So we talked earlier about the tax on the forgiven amount at the end of repayment. So let's say you do 120 monthly payments, that's 10 years of payments, and then the remaining balance is forgiven. Because you've worked in that public service job, that means that that forgiven amount is not taxable, right? So that's quite a bit different. We have seen more and more of our colleagues reach PSLF. So for example, this letter here is from a veterinarian that was awarded public service loan forgiveness, and they had over $400,000 worth of student loan balance that was forgiven, right? So if your career takes you in that direction, then that can absolutely be a wonderful thing. I would also say that you never know where your career is going to take you. So one of the things that Tony and I have seen is that, you know, you'll have veterinarians that start putting a bunch of money towards their student loan, trying to pay that down, and then they, you know, find that they love shelter medicine, and they find a great shelter med job, and it's PSLF eligible, and then they're able to have forgiveness after 10 years, and it's tax-free. So definitely be open to those opportunities and understand how this might play into your repayment strategy. All right, let's do that student loan physical exam. So private loans are separate, right? Those private loans, they don't have the same options as your federal student loans. These will not show up in some of the stuff that we're about to explore, but instead you could look at annualcreditreport.com if you're trying to find any private loans that you think you have and you haven't, you know, been able to keep track of or anything like that. Federal student loans, you can find that information on studentaid.gov and then use some of our student debt center tools to better understand that. So it starts off with the My Student Loan tool, then the in-school loan estimator, and the loan repayment simulator. And we're going to take a look at all of those. So let's see here. If you would like, you can follow along here and also do these same things that I'm doing. And that'll give us an opportunity to kind of talk about what you're seeing and if you have questions. So I'm going to studentaid.gov because I want to download my student aid data file. I'll log in here. I'm on the other browser. My browser wasn't working, so now all my saved passwords are gone. Let me find my password too. Actually. Let's do this. All right. As with everything, things are super secure now. So it's just usually. All right, so you all should have studentaid.gov login because of FAFSA and everything else. Once you log in here, so we see my student loan balance. This doesn't necessarily give us all of the details that we need. So instead, go to the View Details button here. And then you're going to click this button to download my aid data. That downloads a text file. You can open it. It's really ugly. The first time that I opened one of those, I was terrified. I was like, this is incomprehensible. But instead we have the My Student Loans tool, which will help you to break down that information and understand it better. So we're gonna go here. Like I said, if you've downloaded that file, you can kind of follow along here. So the My Student Loans tool, you'll see in a couple of different options, right? For those that don't have student loans yet, but will, this is where you all fall. I have student loans with more to go. And then I have graduated from vet school. And we're gonna go ahead. I've got a couple of examples. All right, so we upload that file. All right, so we've got an anonymized file here. We can see the date of the file, the fact that the student is still full-time. If later on in your career, you do pursue public service loan forgiveness and you start logging that PSLF time, you'll be able to see that reflected here as well. This is a summary of loan information, right? So how many loans this person currently has, their principal, current unpaid interest, so the total owed, looking at the weighted average interest rates across all of the loans they have, how much interest is accrued on a monthly basis, once you're in repayment, what the monthly payment is, and as well as how much has been paid toward those student loans. If you have health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students, those are not offered at every school, but if you do have those do not show up in that student aid data file. So we've built this button to add loans, and you can add those health profession loans or the loans for disadvantaged students, so that way you can include that information here. All right, so then in our loan groups, we see that there are 2 direct loans here. You can click that show details button, and so that'll tell you the disbursement date, how much was dispersed, the principal. Again, all of these really helpful things. You can see how much the cumulative paid amount was. For now, this is an in-school status, right? So this person is a first-year student in Illinois, and their loans are in an in-school status. Once you hit repayment, you'd be able to see the repayment plan that your loans are enrolled in. This is a really good column to pay attention to once you're getting closer to graduation, because after you've graduated, you'll want to see when your loans have entered the grace period. And that's where you're going to find that is in that repayment plan column. If you're using an income-driven repayment plan, you'll also see the anniversary date, which is the date that you need to update your income information each year. So some really helpful information there. You can also see the loan types, right? So this person has a direct Stafford unsubsidized loan, as well as a Grad Plus loan. And again, you can see all of that individual information for the different loan types. You can identify your loan servicer here, right? So we have loans with Aidvantage. You can also review which income-driven repayment plans your student loans are eligible for. So like we said, loans are either eligible for IBR 2009 or IBR 2014, depends on when you started borrowing. Most of the people on this call are probably going to be eligible for IBR 2014, unless you've taken, an alternate path through education, or maybe this is a second career and maybe you do have some older student loans there. Again, pay is set to phase out. So especially with this person being a first-year student, they're not going to be able to use pay once they get to repayment, but we also see that their loans are eligible for save. This percentage here shows us how much of your total student loan balance is eligible for those plans. So if you do have some older loan types that may not be eligible for all of the plans, you may not see 100% there. If you do have those, we'll come back to that here in a second, but there are some options for those loan types. If you're interested in public service loan forgiveness, you can also review that information here as well, right? So the loans we have, are they eligible loan types? You're going to look for that green check. The repayment plan, is it a repayment plan that is forgiveness eligible, that fits for public service loan forgiveness? Loan servicer. So this shows up as yellow because this person's loan servicer is Aidvantage, but the official loan servicer of public service loan forgiveness is Mohila. as well as showing your accumulated PSLF time. So really just some helpful information here that can walk you through what is buried in your student aid data file and make it a little bit more comprehensible, help you to learn a little bit more about your loan types. You can look up that you have direct Stafford loans and then go to the WikiDebt and learn more about those. See which income-driven repayment plans you're eligible for and use some of the VIN Foundation resources to explore more about those repayment plans. But we know this person's the first year, right? So they've just started borrowing and they have more borrowing to do. So we can take this information and then transfer it to the in-school loan estimator. There's also a link here to the loan repayment simulator for those that do not have more borrowing to do. But because we're a first year, we'll go ahead and move that over. All right, so we see we have a University of Illinois, and this student was a non-resident actually. And so we've got start date, expected graduation date, 3 more years to borrow. We've transferred over the loan information from the My Student Loans tool. We can even see that there is the expected dispersal for the spring semester already included here. And then if we come down here, we're able to project that future borrowing for the rest of vet school. There is this button to click it and fill in the estimate. You guys are in school. You have a good understanding of what your borrowing looks like. So we'll go ahead, and the person was a noise student, and look up the cost of attendance at that school. So when we look that up, we see a non-resident tuition. That person was out of state of $53,000. Their campus fees, room board cost here as well. So you're able to get a better idea of what your actual borrowing costs are going to be. And develop a better understanding when you look at your award offer for this year, or if you're second or third year previous years of borrowing, and look at your borrowing habits and be able to project that a little bit more. So we see this person had, looked like they took the full amount. So let's say that next year they decide they have some leftover loan money and they don't need to borrow as much. Let's say we do that again. And then let's say we get to 4th year and maybe we need to borrow a little bit more because we've got some increased costs, maybe tuition's gone up in that amount of time. We're also going to look at interest rates over time, right? We know, we can guess that the interest rates are going to likely go up over time. We don't often see those go down, with the exception of a global pandemic. So let's say current weighted average interest rate was 7.5. So let's see. Interest rates are looking pretty high right now. So we're gonna, all right, we'll have some projected interest rates there. And then that helps you to generate these loan details for the future borrowing, right? So in this first line here, we can see the current total principal, weighted average interest rate for the amount that has already been borrowed. If you have health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students where you project to have those in the future, you can include that information as well. And then we can, let's see here, the projected future borrowing, and then it'll add it up. So, when we project what this person may have based on this scenario of student loans at the end, so we see a total principal, what they've borrowed, of $295,000. We see in-school interest. We see that total balance, their weighted average interest rate that we've projected based on the numbers that we've included. This number here shows grace period interest. So when you graduate vet school, your student loans, the first time they, enter repayment, they actually go through a grace period. That grace period, it's 6 months, there's no payment due, but your loans do continue to accrue interest during that time. So let's say that this person is going to consolidate their loans in their grace period early, so we don't need to include that additional amount there. So we'll uncheck that box. Then you can take this information and send it over to the loan repayment simulator. All right. So here we see anticipated graduation year, month. We've moved our information over from the in-school loan estimator. We'll say that, we've got our average interest rate here and everything. If you scroll down to the income information, so this is where we can start to project what repayment might look like based on your income, family size, things like that. Let's say this person's going to do a 1-year internship, and then let's see, it's a 2027 grad. So let's say that we anticipate salaries going up a little bit over the years, right? This button here will allow you to reduce your first and second year income, right? So if we click that, let's say that this person, didn't really earn much during their last year of vet school. From the time you graduate until the end of the year, during that tax year, they only earned about half of their annual income from their internship salary, right? Because probably graduating May, June, starting that internship in June, July, and then earning that income for the rest of the year. Then we'll see kind of a mixed bag here of finishing the internship and entering a full-time position. And then we start to see how that could go up over time. We have this set as a 3.5% annual growth rate. If you think that's too high or too low, that's one of the flexibilities of the loan repayment simulator, is that you can adjust that. Then we can get here into the family information. So, if you have plans to get married and have kids, you can include that. You can see how that would reflect your overall repayment strategy. That even includes the opportunity to marry, file your taxes as married filed separately, including if you live in a community property state. We're going to dive into that married situation a little bit later on, so we'll revisit that. And then I feel like the advanced settings get looked over a lot, because when you look at this, you're like, oh, I don't really know if I want to dive into that. There's just some opportunities here for, really just customizing your results. One of the things that I really like to highlight is that you can include a forgiveness savings, right? So we know that if you were projected to reach student loan forgiveness, potential tax on that, and so maybe you've already started, when you're in repayment and you're using this tool, if you've already started a forgiveness savings, you can include that information here. Let's run that and see what we get. So here you can see we've got a couple of different plans to compare, right? We've got our starting balance, the interest rate, but really when we start diving into this, so looking at that standard 10-year repayment for this projection that we've put together, right? We're looking at a monthly payment of $3,700 a month. That may not be something, especially on an internship salary, that is affordable, versus if we're using our income to base our student loan payment, then we're looking at, a $0 per month payment. And then you start looking at that across multiple years. So these lines here will total up the first, couple of years of repayment. When you look at the next 5 years, so the first 5 years here of student loan repayment, using the standard 10-year plan, this person would be putting like $222,000 towards their student loans, versus using Save, you're looking at closer to $22,000. What could you do with $200,000 over 5 years? How could you use that to better both your overall financial wellness, your family, your career, all of those things? There's just a ton of information here. So one of the things that I think is really helpful in this is, again, with Save, we can see how that 100% unpaid interest subsidy, the fact that your total balance does not grow throughout repayment, how that plays into this. So let's compare that amount forgiven in IBR 2014 versus Save, right? Because your balance does not grow throughout repayment, with Save, the projected amount forgiven is significantly less than what we see here for IBR 2014. And then when you look at that potential tax on forgiveness, now we're looking at a significantly lower potential tax on forgiveness using Save than we see with IBR 2014, right? So really starting to explore, what does this mean for your finances, for your flexibility throughout repayment, and how you can use that to benefit you. The total cost of loan line here, it gets a lot of attention. I don't always necessarily jump straight to here. In this scenario, we do see that both IBR 2014 and SAVE do result in a lower total cost of loan. That may or may not happen in your student loan repayment simulation. And if you have questions about that, we can definitely explore that a little bit more with you. The loan repayment simulator also has a forgiveness planning module, which is really helpful when we start with that. You start looking at that concept of how to plan for forgiveness. And so you'll see, again, because SAVE results in that lower potential tax on forgiveness, the amount that's recommended to start saving for that is lower than if you compare to IBR 2014, just again, helping you to achieve that financial flexibility throughout repayment. And this is where, if you are in repayment and you have that savings already, you can use that to start, how does that change this number? Do you need to save less? Things like that. So really these tools, there's just so much here. You can see how in SAVE, because of that, and it would be the same for some of the other income-driven repayment plans, but because of that internship, you do see that extended lower monthly payment before your monthly payment starts to increase as your income increases over time, right? And so just using, especially this time of when you have lower income, but honestly, throughout repayment to benefit you, your family, things like that. So those are those tools that we have that, really are incredibly, incredibly helpful to understand repayment. I definitely encourage you all to play around with those. If you have questions, feel free to let us know. All right, let's go back here. All right, to borrow better, what does that mean? These are steps that you can take now to borrow less, reduce your future repayment stress. So much of what we've discussed and so many of your questions that you've submitted have really focused on repayment, but we really want to back up and think about, while you're in vet school, what can you do now? Because at the end of the day, when you graduate, walk across that stage, you get the hood, congratulations, you're a doctor, your family's crying. At that point, you can't give back your student loan, right? Like what's yours is yours. So now, while you're in school, is the time that you can really have, some impact on that amount. All right, so starting off with understanding your student loans. So we've discussed a lot about federal student loans. These are the different types that are available. Again, those health profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students can be really helpful if you're eligible for those. Vet school borrowing is different than undergrad borrowing. So you are considered independent of your parents. So their income information is not taken into account for your vet school borrowing. The exception is these two types of loans here, those HPSLs and those loans for disadvantaged students. Those do require your parental information because they are financial need based. But the other loan types that you can use to borrow up to the cost of attendance, right? We looked that up on the Illinois website for that student. You can borrow up to the cost of attendance using direct unsubsidized and grad plus loans. So really, those are available to each of you. And those are the loan types that we saw in that student aid data file. All right, so interest is back. We've mentioned it a couple of times. All right, so we can see here that the direct unsubsidized loans have an interest rate of 7.05% this year. Those grad plus loans is 8.05%. The thing that I really want you to know here is to start your borrowing with direct unsubsidized loans. And that's because these have lower interest rates and fees than your grad plus loans. So that's going to help you to keep your total borrowing costs lower, because during that time in school, when you're accumulating unpaid interest, that it's not accumulating as quickly with these amounts. Those direct unsubsidized loans, they are capped based on how long your academic term is, right? So when we think of a pretty standard, like August, September to May-ish, like a 9-month term, that means you can borrow up to $40,500 in those direct unsubsidized loans. For some vet schools, like for many vet schools, that does not cover everything, right? So then you start using grad plus loans in order to borrow up to, you can borrow up to the full cost of attendance with these loans. However, because these have higher interest rates, that's why we want to maximize this borrowing first, right? It's not that grad plus loans are bad, you know, they're still a federal student loan type. They have all of the flexibilities and everything else. It's just that you do want to make smart choices about your borrowing and make sure that you borrow the full amount of your direct unsubsidized loans before you move into that grad plus. You know, if you're eligible for these lower, you know, the HPSLs and the LDS, they are locked in at a 5% interest rate, right? So if you're eligible for those are also a great option. Student loan interest rates are set on a yearly basis, right? So the amount that we have borrowed during the 2023-24 academic year, those interest rates are set. Next year are going to have different interest rates. So what you borrow in the following academic term is going to have probably a higher interest rate. So that's based on the US 10-year Treasury yield and is determined usually like the end of May each year. So we don't yet know what next year's student loan interest rates are going to be, but looks like they will be higher. And that's a big deal because here in the last couple of years, we've seen some of the lowest interest rates for student loans that we've seen in a long time. And so you're really seeing quite like the two ends of the spectrum with those that, you know, have recently graduated or even the, you know, class of 2024 of where you have had lower interest rates over the whole time that you've been in vet school and how that's going to play into your repayment versus unfortunately those of you that are first and second years, you know, it's going to look a lot different. You're going to be seeing those higher student loan interest rates, and that really makes it all that more important to understand your borrowing, make sure you're making smart choices about those student loans. If these were set, I looked this up earlier today, and based on the 10-year Treasury amount and everything, if those were set today, the direct unsubsidized loans, right, so which are currently like 7.05%, would go up to 8.16%. And that means these would go up to 9.16%, right? So depending on what happens between now and May, we're potentially seeing some significantly higher student loan interest rates than we are currently seeing. So really make sure that you understand all of the concepts that, you know, just help you to keep your total borrowing and repayment costs lower as possible. Does that mean borrow the absolute minimum? And that answer is no, right? There are some things that I think are valuable, that it's okay for you to take out some additional student loans, more than like what you would see to say, I feel like sometimes students get stuck on like, oh, I'm only going to borrow what I need for tuition. You still got to pay for things, right? There's rent, there's food, there's gas, there's all of those things. So make sure that you are able to pay for those things, because I'd much rather you use federal student loans rather than credit cards to cover that, right? So understand that cost. Look at the cost of attendance on your vet school website. Does your clinical year have a higher tuition rate than the other years that you're in school, right? So I went to University of Georgia. After our third year, we went straight on to clinics, right? We had a whole year of school. That means that one of my years, my third year, had a higher tuition than the other years. That's something that's not always necessarily made super clear to vet students, so make sure you understand that. And then budget. I know it's not anyone's favorite thing. I know many of you are probably sighing or rolling your eyes, but budgeting is just, it's such a great tool for your finances overall. And it is really important to you as students to have a budget and understand what you need to borrow, sanity check your expenses, right? So I had a classmate in vet school that decided that she needed to take a trip to Italy using her student loans. That's not a good use of your student loans, right? I'm not going to say that I would ever encourage somebody to take a trip to Italy using student loans. I did see a question when I was going through the things that you all had submitted about someone was concerned that, you know, they're going home to visit their family, and so they're taking out extra loans for that. Right, that's one of those things. Obviously, we're not going home to see our family every weekend, probably, but that's one of those things that it's understandable to take out additional student loans for those necessary things. But keep that in check, right? Understand where your money is going. And so oh yeah, and this. So again, we talked about credit card debt just a second ago, but really, I would much rather you use, you know, federal student loans to. I just saw somebody mention that somebody took out student loans to get plastic surgery. Again, I don't know that that's something I would recommend. And so, going back to this credit card thing here, so yeah, there was more of you that indicated that you currently have credit card debt now as students than we typically see, right? And especially with these interest rates coming, you know, projected to be increasing over the next couple of years and things like that. That's concerning, right? Because you can borrow up to the cost of attendance in your federal student loans to be able to cover your costs. So I really kind of wonder where this is coming from and how it's happening. And that credit card debt can definitely get out of control pretty easily. So if you have, you know, if you're having concerns about your expenses and things like that, let us know so that we can help you to like look at your budget, look at your borrowing. How can we, you know, make some other choices? So when you get that student loan disbursement and all of a sudden your bank account has a couple extra zeros than you're probably used to seeing, right, at the end instead of, you know, just in general, it can be easy to see that spending get a little out of control early on in the semester. So consider this method to like give yourself a paycheck, right? So have a spending account, have a savings account. When you get that disbursement, put it in the savings and set up like monthly transfers that cover what you have budgeted each month, right? And kind of start getting used to the idea of like, I have this amount of money for this amount of time, because we really need to make sure that the amount of money that you get in that disbursement lasts until the next disbursement. I don't want you all to get to December and you have, you know, your Wi-Fi bill is due or your rent is due and there's not the amount of money that you need to cover that. So really make sure that you understand those things. I do have to shout out drip.vet. So they have a personal financial success course, and that is free to vet students. I definitely recommend that you sign up for that. It's kind of like just learning over time, so that like drip methodology. So you get a weekly email with like a blog post or a short video, and they really just start breaking down some of those financial concepts and helping you to better understand them. And then how do you level up that borrow better concept, right? So yeah, okay, I understand my cost of attendance and I have a budget now, but what do I do on top of that? Like, how do I, you know, make additional impact? If you have a family member that has indicated that when you walk across that stage and they are crying and they're so excited because you're a doctor, that they are going to want to write you a big fat check and hand it over, family contributions are better applied up front rather than later, right? Because if we have a family contribution and now we're borrowing less accumulated interest while we're in school. There's also some, you know, different tax benefits for things like that. So really have that conversation with that family member that those contributions are better applied sooner rather than later. You have 120 days to return unused student loan amounts, right? And that's just about the entire semester. And when you return unused amounts, that also includes the fees and interest that is accumulated during that time. So that can be a really good opportunity to help keep those borrowing costs in check. Again, you have to have that budget, right? Because we have to make sure that if we're going to be returning unused student loan amounts, that we still have enough to get to the next disbursement. Scholarship and grants, great opportunities. It is very challenging to find a scholarship that is going to cover, tuition in full, let alone your full cost of attendance. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean it's not worth your time. I applied for every scholarship I could possibly even think about applying to, right? It's free money. Free money is good in pretty much at every chance that you can get it. Working during school, if that's something that you are able and want to do, absolutely go for it, right? It is hard to work enough that you're really going to offset your student loans, right? So focus on, if you are working during school, is that grocery money? Is that a little bit of fun money? Like, where do those, does it pay your power bill or whatever the case may be? Use that money appropriately, but don't get discouraged. I've definitely come across people who are like, well, I worked during vet school and, I was able to pay for a whole semester that way. And it really, in most cases, that was such a different scenario and a different time that it's really challenging to make a big impact. But the small impact that you can make there is still valuable, as long as you're able to work and then still focus on your studies, your learning, and everything else. Some additional uses for those loans, right? So having an emergency fund. It's hard for me to say what exact amount you need as an emergency fund, right? That's really a little dependent on your expenses. So do you have a car? Could it break down? Do you have a pet? Do you have one of those vet school pets that's like a complete lemon and loves to be broken and you feel like you're constantly at the vet school ER with, right? Those kind of emergencies. Think about those things in your life, what could go wrong, and then determine what's an appropriate emergency fund for you to have while you're in school. One of the things with budgeting that I feel like students especially always ask is like, well, how much should I spend on these things? And again, it's a similar concept. It really depends on your individual circumstances. I don't know your life, your family, so it's really hard for me to say that you should spend X amount of dollars or this percent on rent and everything else. So really start looking at those expenses. I do think it's a good idea. So at this point, pretty much everybody's been in school for at least half a semester. So look back at your spending. Is your money going where you think it's going? Are you spending more on eating out or going out than you think you are? And is there a way to maybe shift some of that money into other areas where you need to be spending it, things like that? Another really good use of student loans outside of the kind of typical things we think of are those post-graduation expenses, right? So for those of you that joined us that are in the class of 2024 or the class of 2025, and you're starting to get closer and closer to that graduation, that time can be expensive, right? Maybe you have to move. Maybe you have to put a deposit down on an apartment. Maybe you have to pay for your licenses and everything, and then you have to wait for reimbursement from your new employer, right? Those post-graduation expenses can add up really quickly. So start thinking ahead to those as well. And it's okay. Again, I'd much rather you spend your student loan money on that versus putting it on credit cards that you're unable to pay off at the end of the month, and then really starting to accumulate that credit card debt. In-school payment. This was a big question. I, again, pump the brakes on that and let's talk about where that money is coming from. Because if you are a student with a ton of extra money all of a sudden, and you are wanting to pay down that interest that's started to accumulate or pay off other loans, I am curious about where that comes from. Are you using higher interest rate loans to pay down lower interest rate loans? Are you using grad school loans that accumulate interest while you're in school to pay down undergrad debt that is probably subsidized and therefore does not accrue interest while you're in school? Instead of using those amounts to pay toward your loans, instead consider can you borrow less the following semester, the following year, right? Is there a way, especially because that's likely to be higher interest rate dollars that you're borrowing the next year? So is there a way to, instead of putting that money toward loans you've already borrowed, just, keep your borrowing costs lower in the future instead? If for some reason you are one of those unique students that you all of a sudden have a ton of money and you want to know what to do with it, come to us in the student debt message boards and let's talk about those things, right? Let's dive into this repay wiser here a little bit. And somewhere in this room is Dr. Paul Pion, who I'm sure loves this picture that I've included here. But what he always says is life is what happens while you are planning it. And I know that sounds like something that's on a motivational poster, but honestly, it is true. I didn't expect for my dad to get the diagnosis that he got, right? I did not expect that. Everyone that I've ever known to buy a house did not expect the random emergency that happens. For some reason, in the first 18 months that you own a home, there's always an unexpected expense, right? These things happen. And so being able to keep that financial flexibility is really, really valuable during that time. And then Tony always says the best is not always the fastest, and the fastest is not always the cheapest, right? And we saw that in the simulation that we did earlier, right? Maybe the fastest repayment method wasn't the best because of that financial flexibility and how you are better able to potentially use that money throughout that time. I don't have a cute saying at this point in my career, but I do think what we can all agree on is that the best repayment strategy reduces the risk to yourself, your family. It's going to maximize your monthly cash flow. And if it happens to reduce your total repayment costs as well, that's great. That's not necessarily the biggest thing for me. Those first two things really are the most important. All right, so we get to graduation. Congratulations, you've done it. Before you graduate, the number one thing that you can do to set yourself up for repayment success is to file a tax return the spring before you graduate. So each year in the spring, the VIN Foundation will do a webinar just like this with the new graduate playbook is what we call it. It's a great event. Honestly, it's one of my favorite events that we do each year. It often falls after the tax filing deadline, and then we're telling people to file tax returns. So put this in your calendar, remind a friend, make an agreement that you're going to remind each other to file a tax return, because having a low $0 adjusted gross income to be able to document your income when you enter repayment after you graduate can be really, really helpful. And then apply for an income-driven repayment plan, right? Start with SAVE. Potentially, will you switch to IBR 2014 later? That's one strategy, right? You could benefit from SAVE for 5 years and then instead switch to IBR 2014 to benefit from that 20-year instead of 25-year repayment timeline, right? That's a decision for later, right? But getting started, for most of us, getting started in SAVE is really going to be beneficial to you. You can refile a tax return, even if you don't have a job. You can file a tax return if your parents claim you as a dependent, things like that. For our married borrowers, that spring before you graduate, start thinking about that tax filing status. When you file jointly, your and your spouse's combined incomes is what determines your monthly student loan payment using income-driven repayment. If you file separately, so married filing separately, that does mean that you give up the tax benefit of filing jointly. However, your monthly student loan payment is then based on your income alone. And that can really result in some significant savings for some of you. And so it's a really good idea to look into that each year, starting that spring before you graduate for sure, and see how that impacts, right? Does the savings from your student loans offset the giving up that tax benefit of filing jointly? Consolidation and capitalization, I feel like these get confused and we don't quite understand them. So let's just take a second there. Consolidation is combining multiple loans into one loan. Capitalization is when unpaid interest is added to your current principal. Consolidation does result in capitalization, right? And I feel like that makes consolidation sometimes get a bad rap, but consolidation really can be a helpful tool in your repayment toolbox. And so there's some specific situations in which you may want to consider using a direct consolidation loan as soon as possible after you graduate. Your student loans do have to be in the grace period or in forbearance before you're able to do that. So you do have to wait for that to happen. You can monitor that using the My Student Loans tool in that repayment plan column. But if you're starting a post-grad program, if you have minimal unpaid interest, so those in the 2023 or the 2024 graduation years potentially are going to fall in there. If you're starting a public service loan forgiveness eligible job before the grace period ends and you want to start earning that PSLF time sooner, potentially consolidation is a good strategy for you. Highlights there for those of you that are getting closer to consolidation. Choosing Mohila as your loan servicer. Unfortunately, the loan servicers, none of them are particularly great. The reason we recommend Mohila, for those that are wondering, is because they are the official servicer of public service loan forgiveness, and they will have some more experience with income-driven repayment. One of those capitalization changes that has happened recently as of July this year is the capitalization events in many cases have gone away. So when you're first entering repayment, what used to happen is at the end of that grace period, if you didn't consolidate and end your grace period early, then you would see capitalization at the end of that. That's gone away. However, you do still see it in some cases. So consolidation will result in capitalization, deferment does, and then leaving an IBR plan. So those specific income-based repayments, the 2009 or the 2014 plans will result in that. If you're looking at that save to IBR 2014 strategy, that switch going in that direction does not result in capitalization. So those are some changes that have happened a little bit recently. They're not, it's confusing, but I will say it's kind of helped to make some of the consequences of making mistakes with things less severe. We still want to make, those mistakes, even though the consequences are less severe. So if you have questions when you get to that point, definitely reach out to us. If you're looking at advanced training or other instances of low and no income, definitely look at income-driven repayment for those times, right? Do not defer your loans while you're doing advanced training, because it's going to result in additional unpaid interest accumulation, which is going to capitalize and increase your repayment costs once you leave that deferment. Instead, use income-driven repayment to have a low or $0 payment and continue earning time toward forgiveness, potentially time toward PSLF for that. And that includes, like I said, some other times as well, right? So if you lose your job, family leave, things like that, when you have a lower or no income, then potentially you could use that as that time as well. Academic residencies. So if you're doing like an MPA to PhD, MBA, things like that, again, look at those income-driven repayment plans. Save is going to be your best friend during this time. That's because many of these programs can extend for a long time. And if you defer your loans, then you're accumulating interest during that time. So instead, use Save, where you benefit from that 100% unpaid interest subsidy. You benefit from those lower payments, and that way you can continue toward student loan forgiveness, but you're not going to be seeing, your interest accumulate and then add to your total balance or anything like that. So keep that in mind as well. Private refinance. Think twice. If you go through a private refinance after you graduate, we saw this a lot over the last couple of years because people were trying to target lower interest rates. So instead of targeting those lower interest rates, because you're losing out on those protections of keeping your student loans within the federal system, the ability to use income-driven repayment, the ability that if something happens to you, your family, if unfortunately you pass away or something like that, federal student loans, they go away with you. You're not leaving those to your family members to repay. Private refinance, that's not necessarily the case, right? You lose out on a lot of those protections by going through that private refinance. You also lose out on future benefits and the potential for student loan forgiveness, right? And we have seen that a lot here recently, where people, did a private refinance of student loans, and now you're coming to us with questions because of some of the benefits that have happened since then. And maybe they would be reaching student loan forgiveness in a couple of years, and instead they've private refinanced their loans, and they're now going to have to keep repaying on their loans for another 20 years. So really think twice about that. It's not necessarily as beneficial as it might seem at first glance. Consolidation procrastination, right? It's a useful tool in your toolbox. Don't avoid it if it's going to be something that's helpful for your repayment strategy. Another mistake is starting with income-based repayment, right? Because everybody seems to think that income-based repayment just is an umbrella term for these different income-driven repayment plans. And instead, that's going to put you on IBR 2009 or 2014, and that may not necessarily be the most beneficial plan for you at that time. Watch out for missing renewals when you're using income-driven repayment. Don't use forbearance or deferment. Instead, use those plans that we've been talking about. Paying more than your income requires, especially while using Save, right? When you pay your minimum monthly payment and then benefit from that 100% unpaid interest subsidy, if you pay more than your income requires, more than your minimum payment, that extra money is just going towards the unpaid interest that is set to be subsidized. I can think of 1,000 things better to do with your money other than putting it towards interest that's going to be subsidized, other than putting it towards interest that's going to go away, right? Don't put your student loans ahead of more critical financial wellness areas, right? So as professional students, we are often behind at starting things like retirement. I hate to see veterinarians that, pour money into their student loans and ignore retirement, something like that, that's just going to benefit from additional time to grow. Really kind of think twice and how can you use some of these strategies that we've discussed tonight to repay your student loans and work on those areas of your financial wellness. Once you're out of school, start thinking about a emergency fund that is 3 to 6 months of average expenses. Start looking at retirement, right? Especially if your employer offers a match, that's free money. We like free money. Pay off some of those other less flexible debt types. Start saving for some of your goals, right? Down payment on a house. Maybe you want to have a practice. Maybe you want to start a family, right? Start looking at those things before you put extra money towards your student loans. Lots of questions about signing bonuses and employer payments. One of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the information that you all submitted in that homework is just how many of you were expecting these things, and it doesn't necessarily match the data that I've seen about how often that is offered, right? So 55% of you said that you were expecting a signing bonus. When I found some recent data about associates that have been offered signing bonuses, that was 17%. 40% said that you were expecting employer payments towards student loans, but the recent data that I looked up showed that it was only 4% of associates that were receiving that bonus. So one, I don't know that these are as readily available as you're anticipating, but also when projected to reach student loan forgiveness and focusing on that idea of paying the minimum, planning for forgiveness, it doesn't matter if it's you or your employer making that additional payment, it's not necessarily beneficial. So really I don't know that I would hang my hat on trying to find a job with these strategies, with these benefits here. The signing bonuses also can have strings attached, so make sure you understand if you're signing that contract and you get that signing bonus, if you were to leave that clinic within a certain period of time, would you potentially owe some or all of that back? What does that look like? Be sure that you understand that benefit. When you look at repayment, and I often start with the adjusted gross income, which is a number on your recent tax return, your AGI, because that's sort of like the gold standard measure for your income, your discretionary income calculations. It's, probably the easiest way to report your income when you select an income-driven repayment plan or when you're updating your income information each year. Because it's your taxable income, if you use some of these tax advantage programs, right, like a certain retirement savings, maybe an HSA, an FSA, when you start benefiting from those, it also helps to bring your student loan payment down. So let's say you contribute $20,000 to your 401k. That's going to help to decrease your taxes and decrease your student loan payment, right? And so now you're repaying your student loans, but you're also saving for retirement, which is extremely important for those of us that are starting that goal later as well, right? So start thinking about how these numbers play into each other and exploring what are your options there. Plan for forgiveness, right? For many of us in this room, that's still a little ways away, but explore that. Definitely look into that. Use the forgiveness planning module. There's tons of opportunities for what might make the most sense for your forgiveness planning when you reach that point. Your student loan balance, I can say this for me, right? I have student loans, I have a house, right? You can have a practice and have student loans. Really being aware of your overall financial wellness, saving for, do you need a down payment for a practice, for a business loan, or do you need that for, a down payment on a house? Understanding how your student loan repayment plays into how you appear as a borrower really can be beneficial. Your student loans are only one part of what goes into these decisions for approval for a mortgage or a business loan. Can be a little bit more challenging during periods when your student loan payment is zero, right? Like right after graduation or during an internship or residency. So during those times, it can be a little more challenging. That doesn't mean it's impossible. But potentially use this time to save for those down payments, maybe boost your emergency fund, consider other things like that, and maybe pushing off that home purchase. Again, it's not impossible, but your student loans go away. They do, I promise. It's okay to make payments based on your income. Either you make enough money that you pay your student loan balance to zero before reaching forgiveness, or you reach student loan forgiveness. Either option is okay. And really, the big things that I want you to understand or take away from this is how do you keep that financial flexibility, and how do you make sure that you're prioritizing yourself, your family, enjoying life before you start, sinking extra money into your student loans? Because I don't want you to skip out on this overall financial wellness and how important that is overall. Right. And these are those take home points. So we said we were going to revisit these, right? Besides budgeting, how can you minimize your student loans, right? Use that return window. Understand your cost of attendance. What if you do work or get scholarships, things like that. Student loan repayment prioritized over other debts. Again, I kind of wait to do that, right? Your student loans have a lot more flexibility in that repayment than those other types of debt. And we don't want to put off our overall financial wellness, especially like retirement and savings, and ignore some of the flexibilities in your student loan repayment. To consolidate loans can be a useful tool in your toolbox. You do that on studentaid.gov. And it's something to explore when you get closer to graduation. Definitely tune into that new grad playbook the year that you graduate, and we'll discuss, kind of what the best options are for you at that time. The potential employer things, again, I don't necessarily hang my hat on that. I know there were some questions about the veterinary medicine loan repayment program as well, the VMLRP. that program, which if you work in an area, especially a rural area with a specific need for type of practice, you can apply for a program that puts $25,000 towards your student loans each year. If your career takes you in that direction, definitely look into it. The area that I used to practice in, they did have some VMLRP spots available there. But I will say my experience, at least with that, I was an equine vet, and those were for small, people that were doing a certain percentage of small ruminant work. And it was really hard to do that amount of small ruminant work in that area. That was my personal experience. So look into that if your career takes you that way. But I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on that one. Student loans affecting your ability to purchase a car, a home, a practice, right? It's only one part of what goes into those decisions and the approval for that. So definitely make sure that you're looking at your overall financial wellness, your cash flow, and your budget. And then again, like I said, the mistakes, I made them. Don't be me. Don't make all those mistakes, right? And again, I know this presentation has felt like it was 84 years, but I also don't want you to think that your student loan repayment is going to be 84 years. Again, it ends at some point, whether it is because you pay your balance to zero before reaching forgiveness, or whether you reach student loan forgiveness. Both are good options, and really just understand what those options are so that you can maintain that financial flexibility and prioritize yourself and your family during that time. So I know we've got some questions here. Let's get to it.
Yeah, I saw one in here. Actually, I was looking at the Q&A panel.
Say, Tony, do you have anything else to?
No, I just jumped on and I saw the Q&A, and there was somebody who said had a question about consolidating while you're a student after you receive your loans in the spring. And unfortunately, you can't consolidate your loans while you're still in school. You have to wait until you graduate and your loans are officially in the grace period in order to consolidate. You used to be able to consolidate while you're in school, but that option has been gone for 15 or 20 years now. And that's actually a good thing, because that led to a lot more problems than it solved. So you do have to wait until you officially graduate before you can consolidate your loans. I don't know if you guys talked about this. There's a question from Samantha in here. With the SAVE plan, do you have the option to pay more than the minimum payment if you have a little extra cash that month? And unfortunately, paying extra, particularly when you're using SAVE and making little extra payments, is not going to help you. So SAVE comes with a really beneficial unpaid interest subsidy, right? So whatever amount of interest that your payment isn't covering, the Department of Education covers it. So if you try to make a payment above that, you'll actually reduce the subsidy. So you're effectively wasting any of that extra little payment that you're paying. So I get that desire to really want to pay extra towards your student loans, but the system is really not set up favorably for you to do things like that, right? So until your minimum monthly payment is actually greater than the interest that accrues, and for some of you that might happen soon, others that may never happen, right? It really depends on your circumstances. So you have to be really, really careful about making extra payments when you're using income-driven plans, particularly the SAVE repayment plan, because of that unpaid interest subsidy. Let's see. This one looks like it was a question that somebody asked when you were talking about some things from Sarah. I know that my number was based on my combined income with my husband. Don't know if that has something to do with the higher numbers. Does that one ring any bell for you?
I think that one came up when they were talking about filing a tax return with your
Okay.
income, I believe, and using your income to determine your repayment plan.
What's your take on working extra relief shifts to help pay off your student loans quickly?
Sorry, I was having an audio issue there. I think I've got you now. I couldn't hear you at first, Tony.
Oh, it says, what's your take on working extra relief shifts to help pay off your loans quickly?
Yeah, I really, if that's something you want to do is work those relief shifts, go for it. I don't know, again, that I would necessarily use that amount to target your student loans, right? When you have those other areas of your overall financial wellness that you could instead use that amount to focus on. What it would look like if you would put that amount towards maxing out your retirement contributions for the year, especially kind of depending on what your student debt to income ratio is. If you are projected to reach student loan forgiveness, it may not necessarily be in your, the most strategic plan for you to put that amount towards your student loans. And especially if you're using Save during that time and benefiting from that unpaid interest subsidy. Because like we said, I mean, that you're basically just putting your money then towards an amount that's supposed to be subsidized. And I could definitely think of better things to do with your money during that time.
And it really depends on what your student loan balance is, right? I mean, working extra relief shifts, I mean, some of you wouldn't be able to work enough relief shifts to actually end up making a dent in your student loans. And that's a really easy way to burn yourself out really fast too. And, the good news is you don't have to put all of that money towards your student loans, right? The great thing about the income-driven plans is that it only requires you to use a percentage of your income. So if you're working extra shifts because you want to earn extra money or you want to gain extra experience, it'll increase your student loan payment because you're earning more income, right? But it's still the same percentage that you are paying, whether you work those relief shifts or not, right? The payment will change based on how much income you're earning. So you'll either earn enough to pay the balance to zero before you reach forgiveness, or you'll reach forgiveness, right? Either is fine. The other problem with working extra shifts to pay more towards your student loans is you still might end up paying more than you have to if you were just paying the minimum and you reach forgiveness and potentially have to pay a tax at the end. So again, I get it. It's kind of like the question about making extra payments while you're using Save. The system is really not set up favorably for you to accelerate your student loan payment, right? You may end up paying more and you may end up postponing other more valuable areas of your financial wellness in order to do that.
We have a couple other questions here that have been upvoted a couple of times. I just thought I'd read those out to make sure we at least get through those. So one is, do my student loans affect my debt to income ratio that banks look at when applying for mortgages or car loans? And I know you sort of spoke to this a bit, Becca, about still being able to buy a home. And it's a question that we often get, but thought I'd give you guys the option to answer that since it's got a couple upvotes.
Yeah. I should grab that blog post link and post it in the chat, because I know we had that as a question from some third years from a recent session that Tony had done with one of the vet schools as well. But really, your student loans are one aspect of what goes into you being approved for a mortgage, maybe a business loan, something like that. Student loans, because it's an educational debt, are not necessarily a bad type of debt. And so that is taken into consideration, as well as the fact of, what is your cash flow? What are the other types of debt you have? What is your credit score? Really look into, kind of like a holistic approach, like your vet school application, right? Really look into all of those different aspects. How does that play into how, your approval for a mortgage and things like that? Like I said, it can be a little bit more difficult when you do have a $0 per month payment. And that's just because especially like mortgages and things like that, I dealt with that. They don't quite understand income-driven repayment plans and how that's going to increase over time. And so sometimes they'll look at just like a flat percentage of your student loans as your payment, which is oftentimes higher than what your payment would be, even once your payment increases based on your income. So that's why that part can be a little bit more challenging, but really look at yourself as an overall applicant, pull your credit report, make sure that if there's anything that's incorrect, you get that corrected and things like that.
Yeah, the banks, they'll look at your total student debt, but they're more concerned with what is your minimum monthly payment on that student debt to satisfy that minimum, right? So the income-driven plans can actually help you obtain financing for a home or a practice using an income-driven plan compared to if you were not, right? So yeah, there are complications when your minimum monthly payment is zero. Those are the things that Becca is talking about. And in general, I don't recommend that you seek additional financing for a home when your minimum monthly payment is zero, right? That's an opportunity for you to build towards the down payment on a home, right? And then when your payment is greater than zero, the banks will look at that and they'll see that that satisfies your minimum monthly payment. And because it's a small percentage of your overall income, that matters more than the total amount, right? There are our colleagues that are out there that have $500,000 or more in student debt and can finance a home and a practice with no problem, right? And the income-driven plans actually help them to do that, right? So, there are folks who think I have to get rid of my student debt before I can get a mortgage or I can buy a practice, and that's just not true. Right. So you will find some lenders that they don't understand income-driven plans and they'll look at your student loans and say, yeah, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to do that for you. Look for another lender, right? Because there are ones out there that will work with you and that do understand the income-driven plans and will accept those minimum monthly payments as the amount that you need to pay to service that particular debt. I've obtained financing for a number of different things, and my wife and I have more than $400,000 of student debt combined, and our student loans have never come up in the discussion. So it's not something that I worry about, except when people are trying to obtain that financing when their minimum monthly payment shows zero on their credit report.
The next question that has the most upvotes right now is, can you explain the unpaid interest subsidy that SAVE offers?
Yeah, think of it this way. So if your interest is $1,000 per month and your minimum monthly payment is $500 per month, the Department of Education covers the remaining $500. Right, so whatever interest your minimum monthly payment that's calculated based on your income and family size doesn't cover, the Department of Education will cover 100% of that difference, right? So in the case where your monthly interest is $1,000, your minimum monthly payment is $500, the Department of Education covers that $500 shortfall per month, which means your loan balance does not grow. Unlike your loans while you're in school, right? Your loans while you're in school are growing because the interest is not covered by the Department of Education, right? It's unsubsidized. So when you get out and you can choose a repayment plan like SAVE, that's why SAVE is really beneficial, particularly for new grads, you won't have any unpaid interest accrue, no matter what your student debt balance is and no matter what your minimum monthly payment is.
Jordan, do we have any more with
we have a couple, but they have one upvote. I'll just say two more here. One is, we get this question a lot of people that want really personalized help. So somebody has said, when do I know if I need a financial advisor and how do you get one and how much do they cost? We might not answer all those questions, but we can at least start with part of that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it really depends on the complexity of your financial goals, plans, circumstances. It also depends on your base level knowledge and comfort with finance in general. It's never wrong, but it can be very difficult to find one you can trust. The financial planning industry is a bit of a wild west. Generally speaking, if you're going to look for one, look for a certified financial planner. That's a specific designation. And regardless of whatever their designation is, you want to ask them if they are a fiduciary, right? Or they adhere to the fiduciary standard. That means that whatever recommendations they make are in your best interest and is not something that they get paid a commission on, right? And that may sound obvious, but again, that financial planning industry is really unregulated and is kind of a wild west. So you get a lot of people who make a lot of money recommending, giving you advice that they get kickback from on the products that they're recommending to you. So if you ask them if they're a fiduciary, that can help to avoid that. Financial planners are expensive, right? So generally speaking, they're going to, require you to have a certain amount of assets in order to work with them. You may find some that charge you kind of a flat rate for particular items in your financial plan, right? So that's where it's going to help to know what do you specifically need help with, right? So everything is really not going to be an acceptable answer, right? Or it could be, but it's going to be a really expensive one, right? And that's generally not something that falls into a new grad budget, right? So it really helps to narrow down what exactly am I looking for financial assistance with in my overall financial planning. And how much they cost is really depends on what we're talking about, the scope of what they're doing for you and how much what they're dealing with. A lot of them charge a percentage of your assets. So again, that's why you have to have a certain amount of assets for them to even kind of to take one on, right? If your asset portfolio is negative, right, it's going to be hard for them to charge kind of a percentage of your assets.
Okay, another one
I do see.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I see one here that I think is a good question for everybody. Do you have any advice to deal with the stress of having increasing debt for 25 years before it's forgiven? And one part of the benefit of SAVE, if you use that, is the fact that your student loan balance does not increase because of that 100% unpaid interest subsidy, right? So it would never be more than you start with after you graduate. But also, I do think understanding why you're using the repayment strategy that you're using can be really beneficial. Much like, again, with our clients and understanding why they're making the decisions that they make about their pet healthcare can help them with that stress. I do think it is similar here as well. I know that I saw that in myself, but I've spoken with many colleagues that have felt the same. When you understand why you're making the decisions that you're making and how that helps you to repay your student loans, but also to be able to do those other things that you want and need to do in life, and seeing how that strategy plays out over time, I really do think that can give you more like confidence in your strategy and understanding that even though you may see people who are, lucky enough to be able to repay their student loan balance to zero within a couple of years, if that's not the best strategy for you, that's okay.
Yeah, the way I treat it is I watch every other part of my financial plan grow out and outgrow my student loans, right? So your student loans, again, depending on the strategy you take, your student loans will become a smaller and smaller percentage of your overall financial wealth and wellness the more you focus on those other things, right? So, your student loans do not compound, right? And that's the great thing about a plan like SAVE. One, your loan balance won't grow. Right, it's guaranteed not to, right? So anything that you do to contribute to other things that do compound will outgrow your student loans, right? So that's one of the biggest mistakes I think I see new grads make is, again, because of that student debt balance is the highest expense we've taken on for most of us in our life. At that point, we overfocus on it, and we underfocus on all of the other things that are going to way outpace your student loans if you focus on them early, right? The benefit of time for things like long-term savings and retirement planning and for saving for a down payment on a home, particularly while you have savings accounts that offer interest rates that, are not terribly different from your student loans, and the fact that your student loans don't compound and you have these really beneficial plans that essentially cover your interest while your payments are low really helps you jumpstart your overall financial wealth and wellness so you can see your other assets outgrowing your student loan balance.
One last question that got a lot of upvotes is there a benefit to taking out a higher loan amount than you need and can save that money for next year so that you can secure that lower interest rate?
Yeah, that's really dangerous. I mean, you can try that. However, unless you're really disciplined, you have a really tight budget, and you're stashing that money away in a account that you're not going to touch until you then need it to cover those expenses for next semester, and then actually reduce your next financial aid award, then you're going to have, there's a good chance that you're going to end up just borrowing more. Right. So I would say, I would rather see students take the approach of, you could take everything that you're offered, but set that 120-day clock. Right. So you're using your budget. How much should I borrow? I've got a bunch sitting in my savings account. I don't think I need it. I'm going to return that amount. Then I'm not going to accrue it for the duration of the next semester until I then get my next financial aid award, and then repeat that process over again. I mean, there are probably some of you who can do those sorts of things, right? But you have to be very, very, very careful, right? Because it's more likely than not that you're going to end up just borrowing more than you needed, right? Than trying to play that timing game of hoping to reduce a little bit more in the higher interest rates for next year or the year after. It was a related question I saw in there about FAFSA modules telling you to pay your interest while you're in school. And I'm sure that you guys are also getting emails from your loan servicer to tell you to pay interest while you're in school. I know that we're recommending that you don't do that, right? But that's financially going to help you, right? That is a much better financial move than to use your student loans or other sources of money that are probably in very limited supplies for you right now to pay interest while it's accruing during school, and you're still borrowing more loans that will accrue more interest, right? It's a game of whack-a-mole, and you're not going to win, right? So I know that those modules say that. I know your loan servicers are sending you emails to pay back that interest, and it's just not a good financial move, right? Borrowing less, having a tight budget, borrowing what you need to be financially secure as you're a student and, reach your goal of graduating and doing whatever that next step is for you in your career. That's what you should focus the most on, right? You'll have plenty of time to pay back your student loans after you graduate and you're actually earning a professional income.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just not it's not specific advice to veterinary students as well, right? That's pretty general advice. So, maybe somebody in undergrad, or maybe, even in a different type of graduate program that's not a high level, high stress professional program, could potentially do that. And maybe that would be a better strategy for them. But really for our veterinary students, that's a tough thing to do, to be able to accomplish and to make it have that impact that it would need to have to be beneficial.
Last question. Oh, go ahead.
I was just kind of looking at them too. Sorry. I kind of looking at this. It was kind of a related topic. Would you use a health profession student loan to pay off part of a different federal student loan? And rather than using it to pay off a different federal student loan, I would take the health profession student loan and not borrow the higher cost federal student loan, like a Grad Plus loan, right?
And then last question, how did you two become so knowledgeable? What sort of obsessive behavior helps you become this knowledgeable?
I'm a workaholic.
I had a previous career in corporate finance, and I thought I do finance until I started studying student loans, right? So it's very different, and it's very confusing. So yes, you have to read a lot, but you also have to suspend some traditional thinking around finance, kind of like the person asked about, hey, FAFSA's telling me to pay my interest while I'm in school. Yeah, that's very generic, non-specific advice that's not helpful for veterinary students, right? And you'll find a lot of that in the federal student loan system. It's not set up in a way that behaves like traditional finance does, right? And it takes a long time and a lot of familiarity with finance in general to kind of wrap your head around that, right? So just like, we gain experience with practice in veterinary medicine, the same applies to finance, right? And we've all made our share of mistakes financially too. So we learn from those and we read up on what we did wrong so we can do better the next time, right? So there's a lot of parallels between medicine and finance. Medicine is a lot more complicated, right? So the good news is if you can figure out the veterinary medical stuff, finance is easy comparatively.
Yeah, and I mean, really, I'm not just recommending them because I work with them and I use these tools all the time and stuff like that. But the VIN Foundation resources, the podcast, the blog posts, the wiki, the message board, goodness gracious, the message board. I mean, there are thousands of discussions that you can learn from and follow along. And you really do start to see some of these trends that we discussed tonight. And you know, some of these strategies play out. You know, it's always, I think Tony and I kind of always enjoy when somebody comes in and gives us a annual update or you know, every other year update or something like that, and we can see how these things are playing out over time. So definitely check out those resources. They're insanely helpful.
Yeah, lately there's been more every other month updates because they had, you know, things have been changing so fast in repayment. So, you know, we gave them advice in June and they come back in August and then again in October because the system has changed, and hopefully it'll normalize by the time you guys get out. I anticipate that it will, but this has been a particularly volatile period in student loan repayment. So the good news is you guys are kind of, you know, you're in school, right? So you don't have to worry about repayment until you graduate. So you can soak this stuff up. And then again, when you get closer to graduation and actually graduate, we also do a new grad student loan repayment playbook where whatever the rules are at that time, then we can tell you the best strategies in case anything has changed from what we talked about tonight and when you graduate.
Awesome. That's going to wrap it up for questions. And as a reminder for anyone still here, we'll be sending out an email the beginning part of next week. That'll be coming from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. Mitch, is there anything else that you or hi, Alexia, you wanted to say?
I've got nothing. Thanks for coming out. For VBMA members, please complete the form if you haven't done so already. That will be sent out to our chapter officers so that they can award credit. And just so you're aware, we originally said it would be worth 1 credit, but since we did go 2 hours, we will update it so that we are giving you 2 credits. So please don't panic that it currently only says 1 credit. We'll get that fixed and taken care of.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I don't have anything in it, but thank you very much again for your time, and it was super helpful. And then again, I put a link in there in case anyone's SAVMA chapters are like super strict about points. You can fill that out, and I could vouch on your behalf. But it'll just be on a local basis on whether or not they give you points or not. But if you need any help, feel free to email me. And thank you again.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
and yeah, thank you, SAVMA and VBMA, for helping us to spread awareness and to host this event. I mean, it's really been spectacular to connect with the students, just because there's so much going on, and this can be hard, right? You guys are focused on vet school and learning medicine, and I know that student debt and loan repayment isn't necessarily the most forefront thing on your mind right now, but it is good to start learning about these things, understand that borrow better concept and how that can impact your borrowing, your repayment, and just really set you up for success throughout the rest of your career.
And
Thank you, Jordan and Tony and Paul, for helping out with this. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, and thank you, Becca and Jordan for kind of saving my rear end here with my scheduling snafu, so I can take care of Lucy tonight. So I appreciate it.
We got a Lucy sighting. It was worth it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night and keep a lookout for that email.